The German shepherd's hackles rose like warning flags as the cheerful ice cream truck melody drifted through Maple Ridge Park on what should have been a perfect Sunday afternoon. Officer Rachel Monroe felt Thor's entire body go rigid beside her cruiser, his nose twitching with an urgency she'd learned never to ignore during their 5 years of partnership. The children were already forming a line, clutching crumpled dollar bills and pointing excitedly at the colorful cartoon mascots painted on the truck's side, their laughter mixing with the tinkling melody that had drawn them like moths to a flame. But Thor wasn't looking at the smiling kids or the friendly vendor waving from the window with his too wide grin and pristine white apron. His amber eyes were locked on something else entirely, something hidden behind that innocent facade of popsicles and snow cones that only his trained senses could detect. When Thor suddenly lunged forward with a bone-chilling snarl that made every parent in the park turn their heads and pull their children closer, Rachel knew this wasn't about protecting ice cream from a greedy dog. This was about protecting children from something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface of suburban normalcy. The vendor's smile faltered for just a split second, his hand moving toward the gear shift in a gesture that spoke of guilt and desperation. But it was enough. Thor had detected what human senses couldn't perceive, what years of training had taught him to recognize even when carefully concealed behind layers of deception and manufactured innocence. As Rachel's hand instinctively moved to her radio and her heart began to pound with the familiar rhythm of impending danger, the cheerful jingle suddenly sounded more like a funeral dirge, and the colorful truck transformed from a symbol of childhood joy into something that made her blood run cold. Rachel's fingers trembled as she yanked open the rear doors of the crashed ice cream truck, her heart hammering against her ribcage, while Thor's frantic barking echoed through the suddenly silent neighborhood. The metallic screech of hinges gave way to a rush of frigid air that carried something far worse than the smell of melted ice cream. In the suffocating darkness of the truck's interior, she could barely make out the rows of empty freezer compartments. But then she heard it, a sound that would haunt her dreams for years to come, muffled whimpering, desperate and weak, coming from behind a false panel that had been carefully concealed among the refrigeration units. Thor lunged past her into the truck, his claws scraping against metal as he pawed frantically at what looked like an innocuous storage compartment. When Rachel finally pried open the hidden door, the sight that greeted her defied every assumption about suburban safety and childhood innocence. Two small faces stared back at her through the gloom, their eyes wide with terror and exhaustion, their small bodies bound with zip ties and duct tape. The little girl couldn't have been older than 8, her Disney princess t-shirt stained with tears and dirt, while the boy beside her was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored in the stifling confines of their makeshift prison. But as Rachel reached out to free them, her radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood freeze in her veins. Another ice cream truck had just been spotted at Prescott Elementary, 3 miles away, and children were already gathering around it with the same innocent excitement she had witnessed just minutes before. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't the work of a single predator operating alone. This was something far more organized, far more dangerous, and the nightmare was just beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel K9 Loyal Souls, where we uncover true stories of animals' bravery you won't believe until you see it. In the quiet suburbs of America, where white picket fences frame manicured lawns and children's laughter echoes through tree-lined streets, evil often wears the most innocent masks. It arrives with cheerful jingles and colorful paint jobs, disguised as childhood memories and summer traditions that have brought joy to generations of families. This is the story of how one German shepherd's extraordinary instincts exposed a criminal network so sophisticated and terrifying that it operated in plain sight for years, using the very symbols of innocence to perpetrate unthinkable crimes against the most vulnerable members of our society. Officer Rachel Monroe had been patrolling the peaceful streets of Maple Ridge for 8 years, responding to minor traffic violations, domestic disputes, and the occasional break-in. But nothing in her extensive training had prepared her for what she would discover on that sunny Sunday afternoon in Lincoln Park. Her partner wasn't another officer in uniform, but a 5-year-old German shepherd named Thor, whose keen senses and unwavering loyalty would prove to be the key to unraveling a conspiracy that stretched across multiple states and involved dozens of perpetrators operating with military precision and chilling efficiency. The bond between a K-9 officer and their canine partner transcends the typical relationship between human and animal, evolving into a form of communication that operates on levels beyond spoken language, where subtle changes in body language, breathing patterns, and energy can convey more critical information than hours of detailed briefings or forensic analysis. Thor had been trained to detect explosives, narcotics, and human scent trails through rigorous conditioning and repetitive exercises, but his natural instincts extended far beyond his formal education and certification requirements. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger lurking beneath seemingly normal circumstances, to detect the emotional residue of fear and trauma that clings to places and people long after the initial traumatic events have passed into memory. What began as a routine patrol through one of the safest neighborhoods in the county would evolve into a desperate race against time that would test every aspect of their partnership and challenge everything Rachel thought she knew about the nature of evil, hiding behind suburban normalcy. The ice cream truck that triggered Thor's initial alert wasn't just a vehicle used for selling frozen treats to eager children. It was a mobile command center in a vast criminal network designed to exploit, transport, and ultimately destroy the lives of innocent children whose only crime was trusting the familiar symbols of childhood happiness and safety that surrounded them every day. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lincoln Park as Officer Rachel Monroe adjusted her rearview mirror and settled into what she expected to be another peaceful Sunday patrol through Maple Ridge's most family-friendly neighborhood. The air was thick with the scent of barbecue smoke, drifting from backyard gatherings, and the sweet aroma of freshly cut grass that spoke of suburban contentment and weekend relaxation. Children's voices carried on the gentle breeze as they chased each other between playground equipment, their parents watching from wooden benches while sipping coffee from travel mugs and scrolling through their phones with the casual indifference of people who felt completely safe in their environment. Thor sat in the passenger compartment behind the metal partition, his massive frame relaxed but alert, dark eyes scanning the familiar territory with the professional focus of a veteran law enforcement officer who had learned to read the subtle rhythms of community life. His ears twitched at every sound, from the distant laughter of teenagers playing basketball to the mechanical whir of lawnmowers and the gentle splash of sprinklers watering perfectly manicured lawns that stretched like green carpets. Between colonial-style homes, Rachel had always found comfort in these routine patrols through residential areas where the most serious crimes typically involved noise complaints or the occasional bicycle theft, a stark contrast to the urban beats where she had cut her teeth as a rookie officer, dealing with drug busts and violent altercations that left lasting scars on both victims and responding officers. The partnership between her and Thor had developed over countless hours of training and real-world applications, creating an almost telepathic connection that allowed them to anticipate each other's reactions and coordinate their responses with seamless efficiency. She could read his moods and alerts as clearly as if he were speaking in complete sentences, understanding the difference between his casual interest in a squirrel and his focused attention on a potential threat that required immediate investigation. The radio crackled occasionally with routine dispatches from other units handling minor incidents across the county, creating a steady background soundtrack of professional voices, coordinating responses to fender benders and welfare checks that reinforced the sense of normalcy that pervaded their quiet corner of law enforcement territory. As they approached the eastern edge of Lincoln Park, where families traditionally gathered for weekend picnics and children's birthday parties, Rachel had no way of knowing that the next few minutes would shatter every assumption she held about the safety of her community and launch an investigation that would reveal horrors hiding behind the most innocent facades of American suburban life. Tópico 3. O primero alerta de Thor, 4,000 caracteres. The cheerful melody of Turkey in the Straw began to drift across the playground like an audio beacon, instantly transforming the scattered groups of children into a focused migration toward the source of that universally recognized signal of frozen treats and summer joy. Rachel watched through her windshield as small figures abandoned swings and slides, their sneakers pounding against the asphalt as they raced toward the colorful ice cream truck that had positioned itself strategically near the park's main entrance, where maximum visibility would ensure the largest possible crowd of eager customers. The vehicle itself appeared completely normal from a distance, painted in the traditional bright yellows and blues that ice cream vendors had used for decades, decorated with cartoon characters and oversized images of popsicles and ice cream cones that promised simple pleasures and innocent indulgence. But as Rachel prepared to continue her patrol route past this unremarkable scene of suburban commerce, she felt Thor's energy shift dramatically in the compartment behind her, his relaxed posture suddenly replaced by a rigid alertness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up with instinctive warning, the low growl that rumbled from deep in his chest was unlike anything she had heard from him during routine patrols, carrying a primal urgency that spoke of immediate and serious danger lurking somewhere in their immediate vicinity. His hackles rose like a mohawk along his spine, while his amber eyes locked onto the ice cream truck with laser-like intensity, his entire muscular frame trembling with barely contained energy, as if every fiber of his being was screaming that something was terribly wrong with this seemingly innocent scene. Rachel had learned to trust Thor's instincts completely during their years of partnership, understanding that his senses could detect threats that remained invisible to human perception, from hidden explosives to concealed weapons to the subtle chemical signatures of fear and violence that clung to people and places long after traumatic events had occurred. She slowed her cruiser and pulled closer to the truck, watching as the vendor leaned out of his service window with a smile that seemed too practiced, too deliberate, as if he were performing the role of friendly ice cream man rather than naturally embodying it. Thor's growling intensified as they approached, his claws scratching against the metal floor of his compartment as he struggled to get closer to whatever had triggered his alarm, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow, with the kind of agitation she had only seen when he detected the presence of dangerous substances or individuals who posed immediate threats to public safety. The children continued to line up with their crumpled dollar bills and excited chatter, completely oblivious to the fact that a highly trained police dog was having what could only be described as a complete emotional breakdown just 50 feet away from their position. Rachel's hand instinctively moved to her radio as she brought the cruiser to a complete stop, approximately 20 yards from the ice cream truck, her training kicking in as she assessed the situation, while Thor's agitation reached a fever pitch behind the partition. The vendor noticed her approach and responded with an exaggerated wave and thumbs-up gesture that felt performative rather than genuine, his smile stretching too wide across his weathered face as he leaned further out of the service window in what appeared to be an attempt to project friendliness and cooperation. But Rachel had spent enough years reading body language and behavioral cues to recognize the subtle signs of deception, the micro-expressions that betrayed nervousness beneath a carefully constructed facade of innocence and normalcy. She stepped out of her vehicle and immediately felt Thor's desperation as he pawed frantically at the door handle, his whines escalating to sharp barks that cut through the cheerful atmosphere of the park like warning sirens announcing imminent danger. Several parents turned their attention toward the commotion, their expressions shifting from casual curiosity to growing concern as they witnessed a police dog exhibiting behavior that clearly indicated serious alarm rather than routine interest in the proceedings. Rachel approached the truck with her hand resting casually on her utility belt, projecting calm authority, while her pulse quickened with each step that brought her closer to whatever had triggered Thor's unprecedented reaction. The vendor's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly as she drew near, his jovial expression faltering for just a fraction of a second before returning to its previous state of forced cheerfulness, but that momentary lapse was enough to confirm Rachel's growing suspicions that something was seriously wrong with this entire scenario. When she asked to see what was in the back of the truck, the man's response came too quickly, too rehearsed, as if he had been preparing for exactly this type of inquiry and had his explanation ready for deployment. His claim about ice cream storage and refrigeration equipment sounded plausible enough on the surface, but Rachel noticed the way his eyes kept darting toward the truck's rear doors and how his hand gradually moved closer to the gear shift in a gesture that suggested he was preparing for the possibility of a quick escape. Thor's barking intensified to an almost frantic level as she made her request to inspect the vehicle's contents, his massive frame throwing itself against the cruiser's windows with such force that several children began to back away from the truck in obvious fear and confusion. The vendor's reluctance to comply with her reasonable request, combined with Thor's increasingly desperate attempts to reach the rear of the vehicle, created a perfect storm of suspicion that demanded immediate action regardless of how innocent the situation might appear to casual observers. Tópico 5. A fuga desesperada, 4,000 caracteres. The moment Rachel's authoritative voice cut through the cheerful facade with her demand to inspect the truck's contents, the vendor's mask of friendly cooperation crumbled completely, revealing the desperate panic of someone whose carefully constructed deception was about to be exposed. His hand shot toward the gear shift with the jerky movement of a cornered animal, and the truck's engine roared to life with a mechanical scream that shattered the peaceful atmosphere of the park like a gunshot echoing through a cathedral. Children scattered in all directions as the vehicle lurched forward with reckless abandon, knocking a small boy's ice cream cone from his hands and sending it splashing across the hot asphalt in a sticky puddle of melted vanilla and crushed dreams. Rachel's training kicked in with automatic precision as she sprinted back toward her cruiser while simultaneously grabbing her radio to alert dispatch about the fleeing suspect, her voice cutting through the static with urgent clarity as she provided the truck's license plate number and direction of travel. Thor's frantic barking reached a crescendo of desperation as the ice cream truck careened through the park's exit with complete disregard for pedestrian safety, its cheerful jingle now playing like a twisted soundtrack to what had become a high-speed chase through suburban streets lined with family homes and children's bicycles. The pursuit lasted less than 5 minutes, but felt like an eternity as Rachel navigated her cruiser through residential neighborhoods where the speed limit existed to protect the same innocent lives that were somehow connected to whatever horror Thor had detected in that seemingly harmless vehicle. The truck's worn tires finally betrayed its driver as he attempted to take a sharp corner at dangerous speed, the vehicle sliding sideways before slamming into a metal guardrail with the sickening crunch of twisted metal and shattered safety glass. Steam began to rise from the damaged radiator as Rachel approached the wreckage with her weapon drawn, her heart pounding with adrenaline and the terrible certainty that whatever she was about to discover would change everything she thought she knew about the safety of her community. The driver stumbled from the cab with his hands raised in surrender, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead as he babbled incoherently about his innocence, while his eyes darted frantically between Rachel's badge and Thor's snarling form. But even as she secured the suspect with handcuffs and read him his rights, Rachel's attention was focused entirely on the truck's rear doors, where Thor continued to claw and whine with an urgency that suggested whatever lay behind those metal barriers was far more important than the man she had just arrested. The sound of muffled movement from within the truck's cargo area confirmed her worst fears and validated every instinct that had driven Thor to his breaking point during their initial encounter. The metallic screech of the truck's rear doors opening released a wave of frigid air that carried with it the unmistakable scent of human fear, sweat, and something far more sinister that made Rachel's stomach lurch with primal revulsion. The interior of the vehicle was a grotesque perversion of what should have been a simple ice cream storage area, transformed into something that resembled a mobile prison designed with chilling efficiency and calculated cruelty. Empty freezer compartments lined the walls like metallic coffins, their surfaces scratched and dented from the inside as if desperate hands had clawed at them in futile attempts to escape from their frozen confines. Thor leaped into the truck ahead of Rachel, his nose leading him directly to a concealed panel that had been expertly camouflaged to blend seamlessly with the surrounding refrigeration equipment, his whines becoming almost human-like in their desperation as he pawed frantically at what appeared to be an innocuous storage compartment. When Rachel finally managed to pry open the hidden door, her police training and years of experience dealing with human tragedy could not have prepared her for the sight that greeted her in that suffocating darkness. Two small faces stared back at her through the gloom, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and desperate hope that spoke of unimaginable suffering endured in silence and isolation. The little girl could not have been older than 8 years old, her Disney princess t-shirt now stained with tears, dirt, and evidence of prolonged captivity that transformed childhood innocence into a testament to human evil. Beside her, a boy of similar age lay barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored in the stifling confines of their makeshift prison, his small body showing signs of dehydration and exhaustion that suggested he had been confined for days rather than hours. Both children were bound with zip ties and duct tape applied with professional efficiency, their restraints tight enough to prevent escape, but calculated to avoid leaving permanent physical damage that might reduce their value in whatever horrific marketplace they were destined for. The air inside their prison was thick with carbon dioxide and the metallic taste of fear, creating an atmosphere that would have been lethal within hours if Rachel had not discovered them when she did. Thor positioned himself protectively between the children and the truck's entrance, his aggressive posturing replaced by gentle whines and careful movements that demonstrated an almost supernatural understanding of their trauma and vulnerability. As Rachel carefully cut through their restraints with trembling hands, she realized that this was not the end of their investigation, but rather the horrifying beginning of something far more extensive and organized than she had ever imagined possible in her quiet suburban community. While paramedics worked frantically to stabilize the two rescued children, Rachel's radio crackled to life with a transmission that sent ice water through her veins and confirmed her worst fears about the scope of the criminal operation they had just uncovered. Another ice cream truck had been spotted at Prescott Elementary School, positioned near the playground where afternoon activities were just ending and children were beginning to gather their belongings for the walk home through neighborhoods they considered completely safe. The dispatcher's voice carried an urgency that reflected the growing realization among law enforcement that they were dealing with a coordinated network, rather than an isolated incident involving a single disturbed individual operating alone. Rachel's hands shook as she grabbed Thor's leash and sprinted toward her cruiser, her mind racing with calculations about response time and the terrifying possibility that they might arrive too late to prevent another abduction from taking place in broad daylight. Thor seemed to understand the gravity of the situation instinctively, his body language shifting from the gentle protectiveness he had shown toward the rescued children to the focused intensity of a predator, preparing to hunt down threats to the innocent. The drive to Prescott Elementary became a blur of flashing lights and screaming sirens as Rachel pushed her vehicle to its limits while coordinating with backup units converging on the school from multiple directions throughout the county. Her radio chattered with constant updates about the truck's position and the growing crowd of children who were approaching it with the same innocent enthusiasm that had nearly proven fatal at Lincoln Park just hours earlier. When the school finally came into view, Rachel could see the colorful vehicle parked strategically near the fence line where it would have easy access to both the playground and a quick escape route through residential streets that would provide cover and concealment. The sight of children already beginning to line up with their pocket money and excited chatter filled her with a rage so pure and focused that it threatened to override her professional training and tactical discipline. Thor's growling intensified as they approached the scene, his keen senses apparently detecting the same malevolent presence that had triggered his initial alert at the park, confirming that this was indeed part of the same operation, rather than a coincidental incident involving legitimate ice cream sales. As Rachel positioned her cruiser to block the truck's most obvious escape route, she caught sight of the driver through the service window and immediately noticed the same artificial smile and calculated friendliness that had characterized the first suspect, as if they had all been trained to project the same carefully rehearsed persona designed to disarm suspicion and facilitate access to vulnerable targets. Rachel's voice cut through the afternoon air with the authority of someone who had already witnessed the unthinkable horrors that could be concealed behind cheerful facades and innocent melodies. Her badge gleamed in the sunlight as she approached the second ice cream truck with Thor at her side, the German shepherd's body language radiating the same intense focus and barely contained aggression that had saved 2 lives just hours earlier. The children who had been approaching the vehicle with their pocket money and excited chatter began to step back instinctively, sensing the gravity of the situation even though they couldn't fully comprehend the danger they had narrowly escaped. The woman behind the service counter possessed the same artificially bright smile and overly enthusiastic demeanor that seemed to be a trademark of this criminal organization, her movements too calculated and her responses too rehearsed to belong to a legitimate vendor who spent her days bringing joy to children through frozen treats and summer memories. When Rachel's trained eye caught sight of a small black device in the woman's hand, her blood turned to ice as she recognized the telltale characteristics of a remote detonator or communication device that could be used to alert other members of the network about law enforcement interference. The woman's attempt to flee triggered the same explosive response from Thor that had characterized their first encounter. The massive German shepherd, launching himself through the air with the precision and power of a guided missile, his training and instincts combining to neutralize the threat before it could escalate into something even more dangerous. The impact of Thor's tackle sent the remote device skittering across the pavement, its plastic casing cracking against the asphalt as Rachel dove to secure it, before any signals could be transmitted to warn other operatives about the compromised nature of their operation. Teachers and school administrators rushed to evacuate the remaining children from the area while maintaining the calm professionalism necessary to prevent panic from spreading through the student population and causing additional chaos that could complicate the ongoing investigation. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she opened the truck's cargo area, her recent experience having taught her exactly what to expect behind the innocent exterior of these mobile prisons disguised as symbols of childhood happiness and suburban safety. The storage compartments revealed the same sinister modifications she had discovered in the first vehicle, complete with restraints, surveillance equipment, and chemical substances that could be used to sedate victims during transport to unknown destinations, where unimaginable horrors awaited innocent children whose only crime was trusting the familiar sounds and sights of their neighborhood ice cream vendor. The interrogation room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the face of Grace Delaney, the woman they had apprehended at Prescott Elementary, as she sat in complete silence, with the blank expression of someone who had been trained to reveal nothing under questioning, regardless of the consequences she might face. Detective Steve Hanlon's years of experience interviewing suspects had taught him to read the subtle signs of deception and resistance, but Grace presented something far more unsettling than typical criminal defiance or nervous guilt. Her silence wasn't born of fear or confusion, but rather the calculated discipline of someone who understood that speaking could result in consequences far worse than anything the legal system could impose upon her. The contents of her cell phone, however, told a story that she refused to share with her voice, revealing a digital trail of photographs that made Rachel's stomach turn with revulsion and rage as she scrolled through image after image of children captured in various locations throughout their community. The photos weren't random snapshots, but rather carefully composed surveillance images that documented potential targets with the clinical precision of military reconnaissance, complete with timestamps, location data, and detailed notes about schedules and behavioral patterns that could be exploited by predators seeking easy access to vulnerable victims. What made the discovery even more chilling was the realization that many of the photographs had been taken in locations where Rachel and Thor had conducted routine patrols, suggesting that the criminal network had been studying law enforcement patterns and adapting their operations accordingly to minimize the risk of detection and interference. The overlap between Grace's phone and the device recovered from the first truck revealed a sophisticated communication system that allowed multiple operatives to share intelligence and coordinate their activities across a wide geographic area, transforming what had initially appeared to be isolated incidents into clear evidence of an organized conspiracy involving numerous participants working toward common goals. GPS data extracted from both devices painted a map of criminal activity that extended far beyond the boundaries of their quiet suburban community, encompassing schools, parks, and residential neighborhoods across multiple counties where children played and families lived under the false assumption that their familiar surroundings provided adequate protection against the predators who had infiltrated their daily routines. The pattern that emerged from this digital evidence suggested a level of organization and resources that implied connections to larger criminal enterprises operating on regional or even national scales, with the ice cream trucks serving as just one component in a much more extensive network designed to identify, capture, and transport victims to destinations that remained hidden behind layers of encryption and operational security that would require federal resources to penetrate and dismantle completely. The abandoned rest stop off Highway 42 appeared completely unremarkable from the outside, its weathered brick facade and overgrown landscaping creating the perfect camouflage for activities that thrived in darkness and secrecy. The official sign declaring the facility closed for renovations had been in place for months, but no construction equipment or workers had ever been observed on the premises, creating a dead zone where criminal activities could flourish without attracting attention from passing motorists or curious neighbors. When Rachel and Thor approached the building's entrance, the German shepherds Immediate agitation confirmed that this location held the same malevolent energy that had triggered his alerts at both ice cream trucks, his nose detecting traces of fear and suffering that clung to the structure like invisible stains that marked it as a place where horrible things had occurred. The discovery of the hidden staircase behind a false wall in the restroom facility revealed the true purpose of this seemingly abandoned building, leading down into a subterranean control room that resembled something from a science fiction nightmare rather than anything that should exist in the quiet countryside of their community. Dozens of monitors lined the underground chamber's walls, each displaying live surveillance footage from locations throughout the region where children gathered for school recreation and the simple pleasures of childhood that should have been protected from the predatory gaze of hidden cameras. The feeds included playgrounds, school cafeterias, library, reading areas, and even residential neighborhoods where families believed their privacy and security were guaranteed by locked doors and familiar surroundings. The sophistication of the surveillance network suggested significant financial backing and technical expertise that pointed toward connections with larger criminal organizations possessing resources far beyond what local law enforcement typically encountered in their jurisdiction. Evidence scattered throughout the control room included detailed schedules, photographic profiles, and logistical documents that revealed the systematic nature of the operation, with children being catalogued and tracked like inventory in a warehouse, rather than human beings deserving protection and care. Thor's continued agitation in the underground facility indicated that this location had been used recently and frequently, his trained senses detecting the accumulated residue of multiple victims who had passed through this nightmarish hub on their way to destinations that remained unknown, but could be imagined with horrifying clarity. The communication equipment found in the control room suggested coordination with similar facilities in other locations, painting a picture of a network that extended far beyond their local community and operated with the kind of organizational structure typically associated with major criminal enterprises or even terrorist organizations that required extensive resources and careful planning to maintain their operations while avoiding detection by law enforcement agencies. The photography studio in Eastwood represented the final piece of a puzzle that revealed the true scope and horror of the criminal network that had been operating beneath the surface of their community for an unknown period of time. When Rachel and Thor burst through the rear entrance of Parkside Memories, they discovered a scene that transformed the innocent concept of childhood photography into something that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The staging area had been carefully designed to create the illusion of normalcy and happiness, complete with colorful backdrops, props, and lighting equipment that could have been found in any legitimate portrait studio catering to families seeking to capture precious memories of their children's growth and development. But the little girl sitting on the white bench clutched her teddy bear with the vacant expression of someone whose spirit had been systematically broken through prolonged trauma and psychological manipulation, designed to ensure compliance with demands that no child should ever be forced to endure. The woman in medical scrubs, who had been styling the child's appearance, possessed the clinical detachment of someone who had learned to view human beings as objects to be prepared and presented, rather than individuals deserving compassion and protection from exploitation. The photographer's casual attitude toward his horrific work suggested that this type of activity had become routine for him, just another day at the office in a business model that treated childhood innocence as a commodity to be packaged and sold to the highest bidder in markets that operated in the darkest corners of human society. Thor's immediate protective response toward the rescued child demonstrated once again his extraordinary ability to distinguish between innocent victims and those who threatened them, his gentle approach contrasting sharply with the aggressive tactics he employed against the perpetrators who had been exploiting her vulnerability for their own twisted purposes. The revelation that these photographic sessions were being used to create catalogs for potential buyers added another layer of horror to an investigation that had already revealed depths of human depravity that challenged Rachel's faith in the fundamental goodness of her community and society as a whole. The timing of their intervention, arriving just as the photography session was concluding and the child was being prepared for transport to her next destination, underscored how close they had come to losing another innocent life to a network that operated with ruthless efficiency and complete disregard for the psychological and physical welfare of its victims. The suspect's immediate confession under pressure revealed the existence of additional facilities and scheduled operations that were still active, creating an urgent race against time to prevent other children from disappearing into a system designed to erase their identities and transform them into commodities in an underground marketplace that thrived on society's failure to protect its most vulnerable members. While the headlines focused on the dramatic rescues and criminal arrests that captured public attention, the true heroes of this investigation remained largely invisible to the media spotlight that followed the dismantling of the trafficking network. The children who survived their ordeal displayed a resilience and courage that defied every assumption about trauma and recovery. Their ability to provide crucial details about their captivity, despite the psychological manipulation they had endured, proved instrumental in identifying additional victims and locations that might otherwise have remained hidden from law enforcement. 8-year-old Ellie Jenkins, whose disappearance had triggered the first missing person report connected to the case, demonstrated remarkable composure as she worked with forensic artists to create sketches of other children she had encountered during her captivity. Her detailed descriptions helping investigators identify victims from across multiple states who had been reported missing over the span of several months. Marcus, the boy found in the first ice cream truck, possessed an almost photographic memory for the sounds and smells of the various locations where he had been held. His ability to recall specific details about ventilation systems, background noises, and distinctive odors provided investigators with crucial clues that led them to additional facilities and safe houses that had been used by the criminal network. The foster families who opened their homes to these traumatized children during the lengthy investigation and legal proceedings demonstrated a level of compassion and dedication that extended far beyond their official responsibilities, providing the stable environments and patient support necessary for healing to begin in lives that had been shattered by unimaginable experiences. Child psychologists and trauma specialists worked tirelessly to develop therapeutic approaches specifically tailored to the unique needs of trafficking survivors, creating new protocols and treatment methodologies that would benefit countless other victims in future cases involving similar crimes against children. The technological specialists who decrypted the digital evidence recovered from phones, computers, and surveillance equipment donated hundreds of hours of unpaid overtime to ensure that every possible lead was pursued and every connection between suspects and victims was thoroughly documented for use in criminal prosecutions. Local community members organized support networks and fundraising efforts to assist the victims' families with medical expenses, counseling costs, and the countless other financial burdens that accompany the long process of recovery from such severe trauma. Thor himself became a symbol of hope and protection for the rescued children, many of whom specifically requested visits from the German shepherd who had saved their lives, his gentle presence providing comfort and reassurance that helped them begin to trust adults again after their faith in human goodness had been so brutally violated by their captors and abusers. The final arrest statistics painted a picture of unprecedented success in dismantling a criminal network that had operated with impunity for an unknown period, with 47 children rescued from various stages of the trafficking pipeline and dozens of perpetrators facing federal charges that would likely result in life sentences without the possibility of parole. The investigation ultimately revealed connections to similar operations in 12 different states, leading to a coordinated federal task force that would spend years following leads and unraveling the full extent of the network's reach across international borders and into the darkest corners of organized crime. But even as Rachel Monroe accepted commendations and Thor received recognition as a national hero, nagging questions remained about the scope of criminal activity that might still be operating beneath the surface of communities across the country, where other ice cream trucks continued to play their cheerful melodies and other predators sought new ways to exploit the trust and innocence that parents and children placed in familiar symbols of childhood joy and safety. The encrypted communications recovered from the control center suggested connections to overseas buyers and international trafficking routes that implied a global marketplace for the exploitation of American children, raising disturbing questions about how many other networks might be operating with similar sophistication and resources in jurisdictions where law enforcement agencies lacked the training or technology necessary to detect their presence. Rachel found herself unable to hear ice cream truck melodies without experiencing flashbacks to that Sunday afternoon when Thor's instincts had shattered her assumptions about community safety, and she wondered how many other officers might be missing similar warning signs in their own jurisdictions, where trained dogs were alerting to dangers that human perception couldn't recognize or understand. The children who had been rescued would carry the scars of their experiences for the rest of their lives, but their survival and recovery served as testament to the power of instinct, training, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals who had evolved together over thousands of years to protect each other from threats that transcended individual understanding. Thor continued his patrol duties with the same dedication and focus that had made him a hero, but Rachel noticed subtle changes in his behavior around children, a heightened protectiveness and awareness that suggested he had learned something about human evil that would forever alter his perception of the world they were sworn to protect. In quiet moments between calls, she wondered about the ice cream trucks that still roamed suburban neighborhoods across the country, their cheerful jingles echoing through communities where families continued to live under the assumption that evil announced itself with obvious warning signs rather than hiding behind the most innocent facades that society had ever created. The investigation was officially closed, but the questions it raised about hidden predators and missed opportunities would continue to haunt everyone involved, serving as a permanent reminder that true heroism often comes from trusting instincts that see dangers hiding in plain sight. And you, have you ever witnessed any heroic animal act? Tell us your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos.